we're here to talk about your amazing book, which is a bestseller on Amazon. You can see it on the screen. It's called Transforming Your Life After Loss, Finding Your Way to Peace and Happiness. Welcome, John.
Hey, welcome, Cliff. Thank you.
So John, let's we're going to talk about a lot today. Your book, your story, how you help people. But let's start with your book. So
Okay.
your book isn't really about loss or grief. I know you cover that in the
Right.
book, but it's really a set up a catalyst. It's more about finding and people finding their true selves. Tell me a little bit about what motivated you to write this book.
Well, as you know, I experienced about a 14-year period of consistent loss. I mean, and it's all detailed in the book. I won't get into all the details here. But it was everything from my job to I had a heart attack. I actually lost my life, It was in a hospital, so I was lucky. I was very fortunate. I was blessed, actually, to be there. And then to culminate it all in 2019, September 2019, I lost my wife of 37 years after a 3-month cancer battle. And when they found that cancer, it was already stage 4. It was throughout her entire body, and there was absolutely nothing that anybody could really do except we just dealt with what we dealt with. And so after that, I was hit with just absolutely overwhelming grief, and I just lived in a gray area. I call it a gray zone in the book, and there's a piece in the book called The Grief Curve, and it describes what that looks like and what it consists of and all that kind of thing, at least my experience of it, Cliff. And so anyway, the reason I decided to write the book was because I needed to get out of that. I was determined not to spend the rest of my life living in the gray zone or living in that state of grief, depression, denial, anger, all of it, sadness, the whole 9 yards. And so that's where the catalyst, I guess, for the book came from, and it took me 4 years to get it done. By the way,
but that's part of the process, right? I mean, people are experts at everything. Unfortunately, you, because of you're expert in loss. I mean, that's really what over the period of time that you had, that's a thing that you focus. But out of that, you've gone through that, right? You've gotten restoration, and your book came out of that. Let's talk about. What in your mind made you say, you know what, I made it through this process. I want to be able to do this to help other people. I want to document this. This was a process for me. This wasn't, looking back now, I realize there's steps and things that I went through, and there's an end game. What's the motivation for you to put that together in a book to help people?
Well, for me, in my entire I spent my entire career in the radio business. I was basically a sales manager. That's what I did. I mean, different levels, obviously, but that's what I did. And what really lit me up inside was when I was working with a salesperson who would just get it and come alive and just go out and put together everything I've been teaching and talking about. I mean, I did it. I learned how to do it myself, but then I was able to teach other people how to do it. And some of them actually figured it out and did a really great job with it. But that really lit me up when that happened. And what I discovered was that I wanted to be a coach. I'd always taken a coaching approach to in my business life, in my career. But when that was over, I didn't want to get back into the corporate world anymore. And I wanted to become a coach, But, I struggle with the term life coach, Cliff, because because it seems like everybody's a coach these days, right? And they're all coaching something. I'm seeing people refer to themselves as coaches, and it's almost humorous to me. In fact, it is humorous to me. It's funny. But the thing is that I want to be able to actually help people. I thought, well, what can I help people through? And then I go back and look at my own experience, look at my own life, and I go, well, it's pretty simple. It's pretty obvious. It's this loss thing, and then it's the grief, and it's not just that, just navigating that, and then getting to the other side and creating a life that they really want to live and that they really are happy with, and how to get there. So that was kind of the motivation, I guess.
And you're right. I mean, it's a universal thing. Everybody experiences life. I mean, you can't live without experiencing some type of loss, right? You can't.
Everybody's going to deal with it. I don't care who you are. And, a lot of people, I thought I was prepared for it, to be quite honest with you. I remember having conversations with myself, sitting in that dark bedroom and talking to myself about how I was going to act and what I was going to be like. And that all just went kaput when the actual when it happened. So I mean, we never know we never know how we're going to react to a situation until we're put in the middle of it. And this book is not designed to help somebody immediately after loss. It's what it's designed to do. It's designed to help them once they're starting to work through the process, and once they're starting to come to the other side of it, to realize they can have a life and they can be happy again, maybe in a different way, but they can be happy, because restoration is often different from what it looked like before. Most people think restoration is having what you had before. It's not. Restoration is having more. My cat just walked in front of the screen. Restoration is having more than you had before, but oftentimes restoration will look different, and that's what some people don't understand or don't get. But and sometimes there's guilt associated with that too, that people have to work through. The book kind of touches on all those things.
It was an interesting point you just made. You said, that when people start to get through the point where they see they can get through it, what are things they can do to get them from like the shock of the loss, or there's, I'm sure there's phases, but what can they do to help them, or maybe help them identify the phase that they're in? Because I think a lot of people, when they're dealing with loss, you can't even process, right? You're just like, no. It's like getting hit with a bat or something. You're just numb. Yeah. But talk about that a little bit. Talk about how they can get from the shock to the next phase.
Yeah, I liken it to being in the boxing ring with Mike Tyson and just getting hit consistently. Tyson was a heck of a boxer, as you know. And when the guy hits you, I mean, and he didn't stop with one punch. He just kept coming. That's what that grief was like for me. It was being in that ring with him and losing, by the way. But to get past a shock and get over it and decide that they're ready to do something, one thing has to happen. They have to want that. And they have to decide that they want that. I've been posting on Facebook and LinkedIn, by the way, since October 17th, little blurbs about it. And I posted something here pretty early on in the process, and I forget exactly what it was, but I got a response from a person who said, I'm in that gray zone, and I'm not sure I want to leave that gray zone yet. And I understand that. I can relate to that, because in that gray zone, it's comfortable. You know what you're dealing with. You know what's there. You know how it feels and all that kind of thing. And you're at least I was very apathetic, and I did not, for a period of time, want to leave that gray zone until I woke up one day and thought, this is not how I'm going to live my life. So they have to want to, and they have to decide. And that's covered in the first chapter of the book, by the way. It's called Wanting and Willing. It's
interesting that you mentioned it's a gray zone, and that's really, it's kind of like the fog that's pulled over their life, right? But it's like a grief blanket almost. I mean, it's one of those things where you're comfortable where you're at, you know where you're at, you know where you were, but you don't know where. You don't know. Yeah, it's funny. Let's go back. We'll stop. I'll just cut it here. So okay. That's an interesting point that you say about the gray zone, because they're comfortable where they're at, right? They don't know what's next. They know where they came from. So it's like limbo. I mean, I'm okay where I'm at, right? I'm okay where I'm at. For you, what were some of the catalysts or some of the things that said that you're like, okay, I'm in the gray zone, but it's time for me to get out?
Yeah, I mean, I say, I'm going to go back to something you just said, that people are okay with it. I don't think I was not okay with it. I was there. I was comfortable there, but I wasn't okay with it. I knew I wanted out. I didn't know how to get out. Okay. For a period of time. And what I did is I woke up one day and I just looked around and I thought, I'm a poker player. I love to play cards, and I had no desire to go do that. I love to eat. I love to cook. I had no desire to do that. There was just no passion for anything. And I decided I prayed to God. I said, restore passion, excitement, and put color back in my life. I remember that very clearly, and those are the three words I used, right? And that's what happened for me was, and I went to bed that night, and I woke up the next day, pardon me, woke up the next day and expected things to be colorful, to be passionate. I wasn't, and not the next day, and not the next day, and not the next week, or the next 2 weeks. But slowly things started to change, and slowly things started to happen. And so that was what started the path for me to restoration, putting excitement, passion, and color back in my life. And those were the three things I focused on. That was kind of became my mantra, right? And that was, for me, that's what happened.
That's interesting. In the book, you mentioned something about a wave analogy, right? Something
Yeah.
about wave. Let's talk about that. What's the wave analogy?
Wave analogy is regard to feelings and emotions. In this, and when you're dealing with significant grief or any kind of grief for that matter, or any kind of feeling for that matter, feelings come in waves, right? You see them kind of out there in the middle of the ocean, and then they start to crest, they build, they crest, they kind of crash upon you, and then they recede, right? So feelings basically come and go, but there's a process to it. And once you understand what that process is, and once you understand the wave action of feelings and emotions, they're much easier to deal with because you know what to expect. You know what they have limited power over you when you understand them and realize it. And there's ways to, you can't manage them, okay, because they're going to come regardless. You can't avoid them, which is what I tried to do and what most people try to do. I think you try to repress those feelings, repress those emotions. You can't. You have to absolutely feel them, and you have to feel them all the way through. And then you have to be okay with yourself as you're feeling those emotions. You have to be okay with the fact that you're in the midst of debilitating sadness, or that you're crying like a baby and you can't stop, or that you're just angry, or you're raging, or whatever the feeling or the happiness side too. And you have to be okay with yourself. You have to love yourself even as you experience those emotions. But the wave analogy refers to those emotions and those feelings. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
No, it totally does. It totally does. I mean, I think part of it is the acknowledgement of it, that you're in it,
Yep.
and understanding what it is, and that it's a wave, that it's, while you're maybe fully encompassed into it at one point, that it's going to dissipate. But
Yes.
you can't do anything. You can't do anything. It's got to take its natural path, right? It's got to wash over you and then wash away, right?
It does.
You had mentioned emotions, and in the book you talked about 4 core emotions. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's pretty key for anybody who's going through any type of loss. Is they are going to have experience, and they need to acknowledge different emotions.
Right. There's 4 core emotions: fear, anger, joy, and sadness. And basically 3 of those could be construed as negative and only 1 could be construed as positive. But one thing we have to understand is that with those 4 core emotions, every other emotion and feeling comes from those. So like frustration might come from anger, or it could come from fear, right? Wanting to get angry could come from fear or come from anger. Either way, the thing is that when we take the labels off those emotions and just recognize, let's just say they just are. Let's not label them as positive or negative. They're just the emotions. They're just feelings. They are what they are. They're going to come, and then you don't have to, but it's good. It's a good idea, rather, to figure out a way or methodology to deal with those emotions and those feelings, and to feel them all the way through. You have to allow yourself to feel. Most people repress emotion. Most people repress feelings, especially men. We've been trained since childhood that it's not okay to cry. It's not okay to show anger. It's not okay to do this or that or the other. We have to be stoic, and you have to rise above it all, and that kind of thing, right? I mean, that's not true. It doesn't work because eventually what happens, that stuff builds up inside of you, and your emotions do come out, your feelings do come out. And a lot of time, and when that happens, oftentimes it's not in a healthy way.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that's interesting, is that not only are you going through grief, but now you're in order to get through that process, you have to learn to process these emotions, which most people, like I said, especially men, don't have, or don't have those tools. So now they're not only dealing with having to process the grief, but they're feeling something different because they have to process the emotion.
Yes.
Yep. Do you have any tools?
I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying, do you have any tools or tips for people that have not been able to, or learn not to process the emotions, or how can you help people that are going through that?
Well, I think understanding, owning, and accepting. You understand that the emotions are there. They're going to come. They're going to happen. There's nothing you can do to avoid them. That's the first key. And then owning them, owning them, just taking ownership of them. They're yours. They're going to happen, and you're going to. And if you want to get through them, if you want to get through them in a healthy way, there's methodologies you can adopt, which I talk about, and I cover this more deeply in a workshop than I do in the book. I talk about it a little bit in the book. I think this is a short book, by the way, Cliff. It's meant to be read in one sitting, or maybe 2 at the most. And then the third thing is accepting those. Accepting the fact that those emotions are going to happen. They're yours. and the ways to deal with them do work. It takes practice though. I mean, it doesn't, the first, I had to decide I wanted to, right? Because I've always been a guy I'm not a social animal and I don't like to feel, or in the past, I haven't liked to feel. That was something I had to work through within myself, and not in my head, but in my gut and in my heart. And that's where the feelings happen too. And by the way, speaking of head, a lot of people try to intellectualize this stuff. They try to think it through and logic it through. Logic doesn't apply when it comes to emotions and feelings. That goes out the window, right? One of my mentors, Jason Su, says, says feel more, think less. In fact, I wear a bracelet that says that, but that's why, you have to feel it and you have to think less, because your thoughts are controlled by how you feel. If you're feeling good and your body feels good and you're feeling strong, you're going to have healthy thoughts. You're going to make good decisions, so on and so forth. If your body's feeling tight, tense, wrapped up, or you're angry, whatever, or sad, then that's going to affect your thoughts as well.
And when and if you're more in tune to your feelings, because feelings change the biology of yourself, right?
Absolutely,
they have a biology. And so a lot of people haven't had that. They don't know what being uncomfortable means.
No.
Right. And so are there things to look for from a biological process or standpoint that you're going through? Because part of it's the feeling, but what are some of the, like, do I have an upset stomach? I feel like vomiting all the time. I'm
right.
like, let's talk about the biological aspects of feeling.
Yeah, well, the buzzwords these days is EQ, right? Emotional intelligence. You hear a lot about that, right? And especially in corporate settings and that kind of thing anymore, which is good. I think you have to be emotionally aware. There's no question that that's important, and become self-aware. This is body intelligence, okay? And this is understanding what your body is telling you, what the feelings the feelings create inside your body. Let's put it that way. Okay. So as an example, if when I get angry, my back tenses up, my shoulders tense up, my middle of my back gets tight. Sometimes my hands will start to shake a little bit, something like that, because it's all the adrenaline pumping through your body, right? When you're fearful, when you're afraid, your stomach will tighten up. Oftentimes, sometimes you'll get goosebumps. When I feel happy or feel good, oftentimes I feel a tingling in my toes or the ends of my fingertips. Those kinds of things. So it's body intelligence as much as anything else. Listening to what your body is telling you, then trying to figure out what's and again, not in a head way, but in a feeling way, try to figure out what that feeling is and where it's coming from. Not what's causing it, not how to get through it, just allowing yourself to feel it, understand it, own it, and accept it. And then love yourself in the middle of all that too, because it's okay if you're feeling upset. It's okay if you're feeling fearful. It's okay if you're feeling sad or if you're feeling happy. But a lot of times people don't think that they don't allow themselves to do that. And I think that's another key, is you have to allow yourself to work through this stuff and be willing to.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that you have to allow yourself to do it. They disregard it. And talking about disregarding it, let's talk about the different types of loss, because you've had, as you mentioned before, there was a lot of different types of loss. And I think sometimes people maybe disregard, I'm going to say minor losses, but the loss of a job is different than a loss of a spouse, but it's still loss, right?
It is.
So let's talk about a little bit about the types of losses and how you shouldn't disregard those. How you should, it's almost, maybe, I don't know, you tell me, but it's the same process, but at different levels, or maybe with different nuances.
Yeah, maybe both, maybe all that, and more, I mean, loss is loss, and loss creates grief, and people have different levels of grief. I mean, when I tell my story, sometimes I don't like to tell it a lot, but sometimes when I do tell my story, especially the last part of it about losing my wife, I mean, people get very sympathetic, of course, because it's a heart-wrenching and a heartbreaking story, and it is, and there's no question about that. But when I lost my job, I was laid off, downsized, fired, whatever you want to call it, out of the corporate world because I was making too much money. That was all. I'd done it for 35 years. That was so much a part of me. It was like somebody had ripped a part of me away. And now what do I do? And now who am I? And blah, 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 all that. So that's loss. That creates grief. It is a different type. It's probably maybe a different intensity, different levels. I don't know exactly how to phrase it, to be quite honest with you. Divorce creates loss. I've talked to people who've gone through divorce, and they also, suffer the same feelings of grief and anger and sadness and despair and all those kinds of things. Loss of a pet, and depending on the person, for me, losing a pet is a huge deal. It makes me very, very sad and creates a lot of grief and that kind of thing. But I mean, it's just loss is loss, and loss creates grief. I don't care who you are. It just does.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of loss and the importance of learning how to deal with it, right?
Okay.
Because again, we talked about before, if you're going to live, you're going to have loss. It comes with the territory. But I think that as a culture, we do a really bad job with giving people the tools on to deal with it, right? Especially men, just suck it up, just the way it is.
Yeah.
But it's going to occur again. It's going to occur again. So let's talk about the importance of acknowledgement and the importance of learning the skills and tools to deal with it.
I think it's so important because if you can't get past, I know people. One of the chapters in the book I talk about not getting stuck in the past, and that's a huge deal. A lot of people do tend to get stuck in the past or tend to live in the past once they've experienced some kind of loss and that kind of thing, because they want to go back and they put a rose-colored filter on it, and they think in the past that nothing bad ever happened. It was all rainbows and unicorns and blah, blah, blah. When actually, in actuality, it wasn't. It was life, ups and downs and sideways, just like life is today, right? But the thing is that people get stuck in the past. They're never able to go forward, never able to move forward. I've had people tell me, I'm happy thinking about the past. I don't want to move forward. So then we go back to wanting and willing, what do you want? Are you willing to have it? And that kind of thing. And it's so key to not get stuck in your head, to not get stuck in the past, but you have to decide that you want to go, because nobody can make you do that, by the way. This is a decision that a person has to reach within themselves. And once they do, then this book will give you, then I point that way because I have the table of contents over there so I can glance at it. But once they decide they want it, and once they decide they're willing to have it, then they can start going through the steps that will create that restored recovery and that restored life and move into that life they want.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit. I want to get a little deeper into the steps, right? So let's say someone has acknowledged it. They're tired of being in the gray zone. They realize that, the analogy I think of is like, it's a lottery ticket with the covering over it, right? And you scratch it off, and every time you scratch it off, you get to see, or a lottery ticket, but they have these things where you scratch it off and it reveals a little bit of a color of a new picture, right?
Yeah.
But you have to scratch it off a little bit at a time. So people they've decided that they're going to go ahead, and they're not okay where they're at, or they're uncomfortable, but they want to get beyond. What's the first step?
First step, like I said, is deciding, deciding what you want, being willing to have it, and then understanding that, testing that want, making sure it's a true want, And again, you do that by feeling that want inside of you. A true want will create a feeling inside of you and inside of your body. You create a sense of excitement. It's like this book. It's like this whole thing that I'm doing now. It creates a sense of excitement inside of me. I jump out of bed. I'm eager to hit. It doesn't create a sense of fear. It doesn't create a sense of nervousness or anything like that. So true wants will create those feelings. And then you have to stop. You have to accept the help that you find, because you will find help along the way. It'll come from unexpected sources. Mine did, that kind of thing. You have to understand what grief actually is. Grief is a monster. Grief wants to own you. Grief wants to kill you. Okay. It almost took my life, it didn't, obviously. Then you have to decide that you want to move forward. You want to get out of that gray zone. You have to, you got to be comfortable you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You mentioned uncomfortableness here a minute ago, or a few minutes ago. And that's so important. If people can learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable, it's an entire chapter in the book, that's a huge leap forward right there. So the first 7 chapters of the book are foundational, and they stack I'm going the wrong way, they stack on top of each other. And then the last 6 or 7 chapters are the action steps that people can actually take to move forward.
So they gotta be being uncomfortable, right? You talk about this is the important point I want to talk about. You said grief is a monster, which is interesting, right? And it wants to consume you, and it wants to defeat you, right? talk a little bit more about that. Well, how does it, from a monster analogy and from a consumption standpoint, how does it, how does that work?
You ever see the old vampire movies? When the
Oh,
old
sure.
vampire comes up and he's really nice and friendly and wraps his arm around you, and then about the time you think you got a buddy for life, he just bares his fangs and just takes your life, right? Consumes you. And that's kind of what grief does. It wants you to think it wants you to think it's your friend. It's okay to feel all this way. It's okay to be in this gray, to have the blanket of grief over you, like you referred to. I like that, by the way. I'm going to steal that, Cliff. But it's okay to be in that place, but it's not okay to be in that place, because eventually that thing it'll try to destroy you. It's a grief is a jealous master. When I was going through this, I went to 3 grief counseling sessions, and the grief counselor I went to was bless her heart, still stuck in her loss, which had happened 10 or 12 years earlier. And the first session I walked into, she said, "I'm here to be a witness to your pain." That's the last thing I wanted. I knew what the pain felt like. I didn't need a witness. I needed a way out, right? So I didn't go to many more of those sessions after that, because I just didn't feel like it was right for me. But grief will totally overwhelm you. It'll control every decision you make. It'll control how you interact with other people or don't interact with other people, because most people withdraw. I tended to withdraw a lot, and that was intentional. I just didn't want to be around anybody, or I didn't think I did. It was just too much work. It was too much effort. It was too much. It hurt too much, because everywhere I went, there were all these little reminders, of what had been before, because I was stuck in the past too for a while. So that's what grief can do to you. And that's why I call it a monster.
Yeah, you made an important point too. I think that we need to talk about is that from a grief counseling standpoint,
Yeah.
that people, not intentionally, but they who are also going through type of grief, and these could be professionals, right? They could be counselors, that they can keep you in grief by acknowledging the fact, like you said, she's a witness. So what are some things to look out for people that are like, okay, I'm going to go get some counseling, because everybody's going to say, oh, you could get some counseling, it'll help you. You got to talk about it, that type of thing.
Right.
What are the I don't say dangers, but the things to look out for that piece of advice for people and the experience of people going through it?
And remember, this is all based on my personal experience and what I went through, right? And that's where this whole book comes from, and that's where it all comes from, and what I learned. I think that, if people start saying things like, grief is good, or it's okay to, and I struggle with the phrase, it's okay to grieve, to be quite honest with you. Okay. I fight that in my own mind and in my own heart, because I don't know. I mean, you have to work through that process. You have to feel those feelings. You have to feel that grief. Okay. And I guess that part of it, the feeling part of it, is okay, but it's not okay to get stuck in grief. It's not okay to want to live there for the rest of your life. It's not okay to just be resistant and bullheaded to everything else or anything else that comes along. And so if people, like you say, if someone is trying to keep you stuck in grief instead of finding a path forward, I think that's a red flag. Number one. Number two is you have to go with your feeling. You have to go with your gut. Is there a connection here? Is this person right for you? Do they resonate with you? Does it make sense? You'll know, if they do or if they don't. The counselor I went to worked for the hospice, and when I stopped going, I also asked the hospice to take my name off their mailing list, because I wanted nothing. I didn't want those reminders coming in the mail. I just didn't want that. That was part of my, I didn't even know at the time, but it was part of my moving forward, moving past it, or moving through it. You can't move past it. You have to move through it. So I think if somebody does that, that might be a red flag. Or if they aren't helping you find a way forward, but they keep circling back to the loss and circling back to the circumstances surrounding the loss, for me, that would be a red flag. I'm interested, always been interested in moving ahead, moving forward. I know that I can't do what I need to do or what I want to do by living in the past or getting stuck back there. I have to move forward, and I have to keep it up. I have to be persistent. I can't quit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a grief club, right? And people want to have other members of the grief club. And when you're in it, I would say that people that are stuck in it, when they see people move through it, there may be even more of a loss to them, or just they're stuck where they're at, right? Yeah.
And I think too that some people that are caught in grief or stuck in grief are don't like it when other people try to get out of it. It makes them, I don't know what, what emotions it inspires in them, but they think, and by the way, people think there are rules to grief, Cliff. There's not. It's a personal experience for everybody, okay, and it's an individual experience for everybody, and so there are no rules. All the rules go out the window when you're dealing with it. So, and that's the other thing I discovered when I was researching the stages of grief. Man, there are no stages. At least there weren't for me. There are just, there's either 5 or 7 depending on who you listen to or who you talk to, and the 7 are just an expansion of the 5 from what I saw. But there are no stages of grief. You're not here and then suddenly you move here and then suddenly you move here. It's all at the same time. It's very over. The other reason it's a monster is because it's very, very overwhelming, and you're not prepared to deal with it. And nobody is, and I don't know. I mean, I reference in the book there's 2 types of people in the book, or 4. One is somebody who has experienced loss and is wanting to get out of it and move forward. And the other one is if you're trying to prepare yourself for loss. But I'm not even sure that's accurate, because I'm not sure that until you experience loss, you even know what it is you're dealing with. Now it might be a good book to read just to kind of give yourself some ideas or some thoughts, or to remember there's a resource for you, which is the other reason I wrote the book, by the way. I didn't find a lot of resources out there for me that resonated with me, that I needed, that I wanted to use when it came to not managing. See, even I fall into that trap. You can't manage grief; it manages you. But there's not a lot of resources out there, or there weren't, the ones that I felt were any good. And so that's one of the other reason I wrote the book, because the steps that I went through, the steps that I detail in the book, the concepts, the ideas, all of it is all stuff I've done and been through. I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. I didn't include the mistakes in the book, by the way. maybe 1 or 2,
which is good, but that's filler. That would just be filler, right? That would be this. If anyone wants to know the mistakes, you can reach out to John. I'm sure he can tell you all the mistakes he made.
I'll tell you the mistakes.
But those are his mistakes, and they may not be your mistakes. But we'll call them learning experiences.
There you go.
So you let's talk about the grief curve, right? Because you created a chart, basically, because you charted the path. You've been through all this, and something specific to you called the grief curve. So let's talk a little bit about that. What it is, some of the phases of it. Go ahead.
Grief curve is shaped like a U. It's very steep, up and down, And I did it because I'm a very analytical guy, and I like visual stuff. I'm more of a visual learner probably than tactile or audible learner. But I needed something to kind of understand where I was at with it, right? And I thought in the very early stages of this, I wanted to write a book, and it was called Grief Killer. All right, and that's where the grief curve came from. I'll never publish that book, by the way, because what it ended up being my rant. It ended up being my primal therapy, my primal scream therapy, basically. When I go back and read it now, I kind of cringe, but for me, it was necessary at the time. I had to get I was going through the process of feeling the feelings without realizing I was feeling the feelings, and that was part of how I processed and part of how I got through them. But in the middle of this, I also created this grief curve because I wanted the graphic representation of where I needed to understand where I was, and more importantly, I needed to understand where I could go. Okay, and so when you're looking at the grief curve, as you look at it, the left-hand side is the slide down from the point of death in my case, or the point of loss, down to the bottom to what I call the pit. And the pit is where the gray zone is. The pit is where apathy, depression, angst, no desire, all that stuff lives, and a lot of people get stuck in that pit. It's kind of like the La Brea tar pits out in LA, right? Where the dinosaurs fell into it and couldn't get back out. That's what it feels like when you're in that thing. It's hard to get out. And to climb out, the climb out curve on the right is also very steep, and you can get there. And I knew I could get there. But I remember clearly when I designed that grief curve, I was talking to myself and wondering, man, am I ever going to get out of here and up there, and when is it going to happen, and blah blah blah. And it was almost depressing to look at that and to think about, because I just didn't at that point in time, it didn't feel like it was ever going to happen. But for me, it's a graphic representation. I think it's a way to show people kind of what grief is and how it impacts them. And in that grief curve, I detail all the feelings that occur and when they occur, and at least when they occurred, as best I remember them in my experience. By the way, you have to realize too that during this process, none of this was clear cut. It's all a blur. When I look back on it now, it is so much of a blur, and the timeline is it just doesn't exist. Time just stopped existing for me, which is a weird thing to say. but that's kind of how it was. And so it's when I go back and I write about it, and I designed the grief curve in the middle of all that, so that's when that happened. But I actually wrote this book, like I said, 4 years downstream from it, which I probably needed that clarity, to be quite honest, to be able to look back down the road and see what had happened, what I'd done, what I hadn't done, so on and so forth. Make sense, or am I just all over the map?
Oh no, it makes perfect sense. And actually, I think it's a fantastic tool for someone because you were in it, creating it, right? And you looked up and you said you saw it and you weren't sure. But for someone who's going through it, to have that type of tool to say, here's the curve, right? Here's where you're at. You may be on the way down.
Yep.
Here's the emotions that are associated with it. So it's kind of like, I'm feeling this right now. Let me go to the curve and see where I'm at, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a super important tool for anybody going through any type of loss to get the grief curve, because I don't say it provides a sense of where they are in process, it provides a sense of hope, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's an amazing tool that you were able to create, from all of that. Let's get back to some of the process, right? So you said the first part of the book was identification of grief, and then there's some more of the process. Let's talk about a little more of the process. I think we had covered the first point.
Well, again, once we get through grief, we understand what grief is, and we understand where we are in the grief curve and that kind of thing. Then we start the process of getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and that can take a lot of forms. I mean, because being uncomfortable can be, okay, so I'm in this grief process. I'm supposed to be grieving. I've experienced this loss, but I don't want to live here for the rest of my life. How do I get out of it? There can be guilt associated with that. There can be reluctance associated with that. There can be the opinions of other people, by the way, associated with that. You're going to hear that, people are going to hear that, by the way. Everybody has an idea, it seems like, about what you should be doing and how you should be doing it, the timeline you should be doing it on. And again, I'm not going to get into all that here, but that's not the case. Okay. There is no timeline. There is no process. There is no set of rules. Okay. But you have to be comfortable. You have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because getting out of that grief process, well, you're uncomfortable as can be being in it, right? Because it's not something you ever wanted. It's not something you expected. It's not something you signed up for. It's not something you wanted to do. And then you have to get out of it. And that is another whole other level of being uncomfortable, because there are things you're going to have to do and decisions you're going to have to make, and things, feelings you're going to have to feel inside yourself. And feeling your feelings, by the way, is a large part of that. But being familiar with all of that, and familiarity is a big way of learning to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Then you have to understand there's a power of discovery that's involved. You're going to discover things about yourself you never realized. You're going to discover solutions you never thought of. You're going to discover things that you might want to do, but you're not sure how to go about doing them. And then you're going to have to figure out how you're going to the way out. What's that look like for you? What's the path forward look like? I give you some specific steps and some thoughts inside the book that I don't want to disclose here yet, because I want people to read the book, quite frankly. Sure. But inside the book, it'll show you, give you different exercises and different ways to do that. You have to get out of your head. You have to understand the difference between recovery and restoration, and then you have to decide, what is your next going to look like? What is your next going to be? What do you really want in life? I mean, and the last point is it really is up to an individual, really is up to a person. You have a choice. You can stay right where you're at and stay there if you're happy there and comfortable there. I'm not going to say that's okay, because I don't believe people should stay stuck in grief. That's my personal opinion. Or you can move forward and you can create a life that you really want to live, and that you're going to love living. And you can learn to let go of some of that stuff in the past. It doesn't mean, by the way, letting go of the past doesn't mean forgetting memories. You're always going to have those. Okay. And those are good. There's nothing wrong with that, but it does mean not being obsessed with those and not trying to recreate what you had before in the future. Maybe that's a better way to say that. I'm not sure.
Right. You're never going to have what you had.
No.
But you can have something else.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about two terms you just mentioned as part of the process. The difference between recovery and restoration. Yeah. Because recovery, to me at least, and I'll let you get into it, but from recovery is, well, you know what? Why don't we just have you get into it? Because recovery for me is like is I'm finding something maybe that I had before. I'm recovering something I had before, but restoration is a whole different topic. And so let's talk about the two terms. Let's talk about what they are, the differences, and why you need to have both if you want to complete the process.
Yeah, and again, this is based on my personal experience and the way my mind works and the way I think and believe and all that. But for me, recovery is healing up. It's healing more than anything else, probably. I mean, you're going to have scar. You've been wounded, right? You've been seriously wounded. Maybe almost fatally wounded. Okay, and you have to recover from that, and that takes time because that doesn't happen overnight. So recovery is healing. It's getting back to a place to where your body starts to feel good, so your mind can start feeling better and start feeling good, and you can start making rational decisions. Some of the decisions I made when I was in the middle of the grief were stupid, and they were dumb. I talk about one or two of them in the book, and I go back and look at them today and I just shake my head like, why did I ever do that? But that's what grief does to you. It has that kind of an impact on you. So recovery is getting out of that. And then once I believe once you start the recovery process, then you're ready for the restoration process. You're ready to start creating that life that you really want, and to go after those things, and to understand and accept, and understand, own, and accept that you can be happy, that you can have a life, that you don't have to stay stuck here. You don't have to carry a burden of guilt with you. You don't have to be sad all the time, or depressed, or angry, or whatever the feeling is that you're feeling, and those kind of things, And I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but the restoration process, it's not a process. Basically, it's something. Well, it is and it isn't. It's something that happens, something that occurs, but it'll be more than you had before, and you'll know it when it happens to you, when it starts to happen to you. I'm in the middle of it. I mean, I really am. I'm in the middle of it right now, in the middle of my life here, and when I look back downstream, I can see it clearly. It's hard to see it going forward. Usually, you see it one step at a time as you move forward with it, but you can see it clearly once you look back downstream and kind of see what's happened and see the process.
Sure. No, I think it's an important distinction to know those two things. And, I think that lends us to maybe a next question. So a lot of people try to do this on their own, right? We're trained to kind of do it on our own. I mean, society more is now about mental health, and they're asking about helping. Well, let's talk about some of the importance of finding a coach, a true coach, right? Because,
Right.
That's maybe specialized in this area. And again, everybody's a life coach, but there's
Right.
very few people that are really trained or have experienced or have created a process. Well, let's talk about your thoughts on why isn't it's important to work with someone at whatever level of that can help people, go through the process. That can help them identify where they're at. That can help them move through it. Understanding that this is not a set process, like you've said many times, because there's a lot of programs out there like, well, you got to go through this first, and you got to do this, and you got to do this, and they feel bad when they can't complete those things. So let's talk about why it's important for people to reach out and to find someone to help them take through this process.
Well, just so you know, I have two coaches. I actually have three coaches, now. But I have the coaches I hired for a reason, because I didn't have the skill set or the knowledge, right, to do whatever it is I wanted to accomplish, number one. Number two, those coaches provide me with tools and resources. Number three, those coaches are not afraid to tell me when, and by the way, this is really important with a coach. You got to find somebody that's not afraid to tell you when you're not doing it right. Okay, or when you need to do something different, or need to look at it. Somebody that can be bold with you. And I've never been offended by what a coach tells me, but when somebody tells me something that I have a belief system or a belief, and one of my coaches tells me, no, you need to look at it this way, and here's why. I always am receptive to that, because those people, those coaches I hired them for a reason. I hired them to improve, but again, for tools, for resources, and to have somebody to talk to, that understands and that gets it, because if you haven't been through it, it's one thing talking to somebody who has not been through it, or wants to help you and ask you questions and goes back to your childhood and all that. But it's another thing entirely to talk with somebody who has been through what you're going through and what you're dealing with and can relate. There's empathy and there's sympathy, right? Sympathy is feeling sorry for somebody. Empathy is understanding what they're dealing with and then helping them through that. And I think that's why coaches are so critically important. That's why I hired them.
No, I do the same thing, and I think because you have to be you have to be receptive to the new perception, right? I mean,
Yep.
receptive to new perspectives, and not none of us know it all, and I find that at whenever we're dealing with grief or business or whatever, that the higher you go up, the more their need it is for coaching, because
Yeah.
you need some guidance. You need to hear people who are not afraid to say that maybe that's not right, or maybe you need to look at this perspective, or maybe you're stuck, or that type of thing. You've created something called the Craft Coaching Method, right?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that, about what you got existing and what you got planned.
Well, basically, what I do is it starts with the foundation, the transformation, transforming your life after loss is probably is the foundational piece, right? And that's where we start, because that's what people need to deal with, need to understand, because they can't do anything else. Pardon me, Cliff. They can't do anything else until they deal with that, until they figure that one out, right? You can't go to that higher level. You can't create that life you love living without dealing with without dealing with loss and grief and transforming your life. Okay. So transforming your life after loss, finding your peace, joy, and happiness. That's the foundational piece. A lot of people think that's the end game. It's not, to me, that's just the beginning, right? Then the second piece of the Craft Coaching Method is basically it's where we start talking about how to build that foundation, how to build and create a vision for your life. There's the difference between dreams and visions, by the way, and both are important. Okay. But then you have to be able to create that vision and be clear. You have to bring clarity to it, because it's important. You can't just go out there and just go willy nilly. Right. And a lot of that goes back to wanting and willing and deciding and that kind of thing. And then once you create that vision, and it's a clear vision, and you know exactly where you're headed and where you want to go, you still don't have the path forward, by the way. You just know what the vision is. You know what you want. And then the third part of it is is actually manifesting that, creating that, and then causing that to come to pass in your life. So those are the three pieces of the coaching platform. We start with transforming your life after loss. Then we go through creating the vision process and really getting clear on what that is and what you want. And by the way, there's no template for it. There's no right or wrong for it. It is what it is, right? And the third piece is the manifesting of it. And by the way, this coaching part of it, my coaching process too, there's a spiritual aspect to that as well, because I believe that true transformation happens from the inside out. We're a spirit being. We have a body, we have a soul, we have mind, will, and emotions. But true transformation occurs, I believe, starts with the spirit and then kind of works outward from there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I love the distinction. Let's spend just a minute on dreams versus vision.
Sure.
Right? Because I think some people confuse those two, and I think that there was based back to Napoleon Hill, and then it went back to The Secret. It was all about if you think about it, it's going to come true, right? Because thoughts are things if you think about it. But if you read Think and Grow Rich, I think it's the word action appears like 77 times in the text. Yes. So there's a distinction there. Let's talk a little bit about dreams versus vision.
Well, dreams, in my opinion, dreams are everything, right? I mean, it's everything you could ever possibly want. And I encourage people in the second tier of coaching to dream, and don't dream a little dream, dream a big dream, dream things that are impossible, and come up with the wildest stuff you can come up with, and then create that vision. The vision piece of it is I think narrowing it down and making it more, I don't want to, I hate it when people say, okay, so there's a thing going around, right? You've heard of, I'm going to take a left turn here a little bit. You've heard of SMART goals, right? What is it called? Specific, measurable, actionable. I forget what the R and T are. Anyway, I hate when people try to do that with a vision, because you can't. Your vision has to be personalized to you. It has to be what you want. For example, my vision started out as a book, right? But then it morphed into coaching. It morphed into workshops. It morphed into a speaking tour. I want to put together a group of coaches that are really high level and really good at what they do and do a national speaking tour. I mean, it's morphing into more books. It's morphing into courses, all kinds of stuff, right? And so and my vision continues to grow, but it grows specifically, if that makes sense to you. And I know what will happen is, as I go down the road here, that vision will change. It will increase. It will become different. And it will morph into something else. I've shared with you a lot of what I want to do and what I want to accomplish. And so you can kind of see what my vision is. But that all started with a dream. And that all started with dreams of, and it's not just about dreams of having stuff, not just material stuff either, by the way. Vision for me also is equated with purpose. I believe everybody needs a purpose for their life. They need to have a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to go do whatever it is they're going and doing. I think we've all been caught in vocations or jobs we hated or thought were pointless. And I remember having those thoughts many times, but with this, what I do now, I mean, it lights me up inside, and I know it's important, and I know it's a big deal. So I think vision is equated with purpose as well. And maybe that's
it's so cool that you think about, like from your dream standpoint, to dream big, because you said you started out with the book, right? And then all these other ideas came from that, right? So, and I think there's an important piece there of getting started. You have to get started, and people say you take a step and everything, but it's really about that you have to take a step. You have to get started. So let's talk about the importance of getting started.
Okay.
No matter where you're at.
Yep. So it's key. I mean, because if you don't get started, you'll never get finished, right? And let's just use my book as an example. So back in July of this year, June or July maybe, I was sitting down and I thought, okay, I'm going to write this book. It's going to be a short book. It's going to be 13, 14, 15 chapters, whatever it is, 115, 120 words, maybe something like that, something like that. Probably not 120 words, probably more.
Pages.
That's pages. Right. There you go. Thanks, Cliff. But I'm thinking, okay, so what do I have to do to write the book? Well, I need to know where the book's going to go. So I wrote the table of contents, right? The first table of contents, which is completely different now than it was when I started, by the way. And then I wrote the first chapter. They wrote the introduction, and then I let it sit for 4 months or 3 months, whatever it was. And I think about it and I go, I really need to go down and finish that book, but I got this to do. I'm tired today. I want to go watch a movie. I want to go have a glass of wine, whatever. Right. And, so I didn't do it. And then about 3 months later, 3.5, 4 months later, I thought, this is stupid. You got to go write the book. And so I put myself on a personal schedule, a personal calendar, and I wrote the remainder of the book. And I think about 8 days, something like that, because I just got determined, right? And I revamped my Chamber of Commerce. I revamped my table of contents so it reflected more of what I wanted it to be, which is what it is today. And I wrote the book, every chapter, and then I sent it to an editor and started the editing process and the rewriting process. So that's how my process began. So I kind of got started. Then I stalled out, and then I started again, because I thought, this is dumb. You've got everything and you know how to do this. And I think it was fear-based, to be honest with you. I think, I dealt with imposter syndrome. I mean, do I really know enough to write this book? Am I smart enough? Are people going to listen to it? Are they going to like it? Is it something they're going to want? Is it something they're going to implement? Is it going to help them? All these different questions. And you just have to set all that stuff aside, get out of your head, right? And get back into your body. How does writing the book make me feel? That makes me feel good. It makes me feel excited because I know it's important on a visceral level. I know it's important stuff and that people need it and they're going to benefit from it. So that was my process. So yeah, you have to get started.
And you're right. Starting stops. That's part of the natural process, right? I think a lot of times we feel bad that we're like, okay, we're going to do it. We're finally going to make a commitment. We start the commitment, we do it, and we take a step forward. And then life gets in the way. I mean, I always tell it with all the people I work with, authors, just coaching, whatever. Life is going to get in the way, right? You're going to, the key is keeping that having someone to help you navigate those, to keep you motivated going through the process.
Yes.
Because if you're trying to do it by yourself, and then some people can do it, whatever the process is, it's hard because there's parents, there's kids, there's pets, there's wine, there's television, there's pickleball, there's whatever you're into, sewing, knitting, I mean, whatever, football, I mean, just there's stuff. Life will get in the way, but if you have someone who's going to bring you through the process, help guide you through the process, the important point is you take a step to get started, and then you have somebody that gets through the process. Yeah. So, wrapping it up here, I want a couple things. Just a couple quick questions with some answers here. I'm going through grief. What do I do? I just lost my job. What do I do?
Right.
I feel like crap.
Get my book.
Get your book. Yeah.
Get my book.
Well, actually, you should. I mean, you should. After you get pissed or whatever, and then
that's not a joke. That's not a joke. I just love the question
yeah,
because it's a great setup, right? But I mean,
yeah,
it is. It's concept. It's ideas. It's tools. It's ways that you can navigate. And I don't want to say manage. I don't like that word. You can't manage it, okay? But you can navigate it, right? It's like it's like being on the rapids on a river, right? I mean, you got to navigate the rocks and the shoals and the little whirlpools and eddies and all that stuff, right? But you can do that, right? It doesn't mean you're not going to get stuck. It doesn't mean you're not going to get. You might fall out of the boat and get banged up a little bit and get bruised a little bit, but you get back in the boat and go again, right? Or if you don't get back in the boat, you just put your heels down and you put your feet forward and navigate the river as with your body. I mean, you do what you have to do, right? But you can navigate this stuff. You can't, whether it's a job loss, whether it's a loss of a spouse, whether it's divorce, whether it's whatever kind of loss it is, it can be navigated. And I think that's the first thing that people really should understand. Again, I go back to understand, own, and accept. Those are a theme of my book. Those are huge words. They're big. And once people understand, own, and accept them, pun intended, it's a life changer.
Yes, no, I think it's great. And at one point I do want to add in here too, is that your method applies to people who, because everybody experiences loss. People just may not acknowledge it, right? But they feel the uncomfortableness. And so if someone's not like in the active stages of grief, like maybe grief is like
right.
old, they still have benefit about working with you and go through the process because they've never done that, right? Maybe they're stuck in the gray zone. So just talk a little bit talk to the people who maybe just don't feel like I'm not going through grief, right? But my life isn't all clear. It's not colorful.
Right.
How you could help them and how your process could help.
Well, number one, you're not alone. Okay, you're not alone. I've been there and I've gotten through it, and I didn't think I was going to. I didn't see a way through. I didn't see a way out. I didn't understand how to do it. I had no concept. I had no idea, and I was. There was a lot going on, but there was nothing going on at the same time. So I feel your pain. I know where you're at. I hurt for you, but I also want you to understand there is a way out. There is a way through. And I can help you with that because I've been there and I've done that. I think first part of it is understanding where you're at on the curve, and understanding that once you understand where you're at on the curve is, do you want to get out? And I'll ask very direct questions. I'll say, look, do you want out or do you want to stay where you are? And if you want to stay where you are, I'm going to dig into it. I'm going to dig into you because I want to find out why you want to stay where you are. I think I know, because I've been there, done that, burn the T-shirt. But I want to find out what your answer is. I don't want to tell you what those answers are. I want to know where your mind is and where your heart is and kind of what you want and those kinds of things, and just be assured. And there is a way out. You can experience recovery. You can experience restoration more than you had before. It will look different. Okay, there's no question about that. That doesn't mean it's all bad. And you don't have to have it with a sense of guilt. You can find your peace, you can find your joy, and you can find your happiness. It is doable. I know. I've done it, and I'm doing it every day.
Awesome. Okay, we'll end on that because you can't. That's exactly what everybody wants, and that's what they need to. So, John, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Cliff.
People, go out and get his book. It's available. It's on Amazon. It's a bestseller on Amazon. You can go to your website. What's your website?
It's craftmethodcoaching.com.
There you go. It's a lot of information is below the video. So again, John, thanks again.
Thank you.